All right, so it's 12:30 right now, and um, here we go. Okay, so it's 12:30 right now, and the race finished about 3 hours ago. So this is my post-race reflection. Um, just completely raw and unedited footage of just my thoughts about the race and just how it went. So this morning we woke up at 3:45 a.m. Um, transition was supposed to open at 4:30. Transition is where I put all the stuff, so where all the biking gear and running gear goes, and where I kind of transfer my swimming to biking gear and biking to running gear. Now, we got up at the 3:45, but just because it was taking a while and we wanted to make sure everything was ready, we ended up getting there at the event venue at about 5 a.m., 5:05ish, and from there I put all the stuff on my bike, got that stuff situated, and then wore my swimsuit and everything. Now the race officially begins at 6 a.m., but it's a rolling start between 6 and 7, where three people go every 4 or 5 seconds, and they just keep going like that for the whole hour. So there were 1,600 athletes this morning, and everybody was aligned by what their approximate time or what their predicted time was going to be. So I kind of stood between the 45 and 50-minute range because that's my predicted time for myself. But it and the 30-minute athletes were at the front and so forth. And in the morning, there's just this wave of green and green and pink caps with a few yellow caps, and there were so many people, and it was so crowded. And the race started at 6, so we were there by like 5:55, all waiting in that area. But we didn't end up going until like 6:40 or 6:37 or something. And during that time, during those 37 minutes, I cannot describe how nervous I am. Like at one point, I did start crying, like just a little bit, but it was a very nerve-wracking experience. Um, and yeah, that was a very, very nerve-wracking experience because on Friday I had a swim and it was a half the distance in the same lake, same kind of course layout, but it was half the distance and I did it in 24 minutes. So I was just feeling very scared. It's cold water. If I fail to swim, then that means my race is over before the big portion of the race even starts. So all these thoughts are going through in my head, and eventually, actually through when we were moving forward and stuff, I think my brother and my mom were at the front, kind of waiting for me to go in the water, but my dad was kind of on the other side of the gate, but he was just standing there and just watching me. And it's like that Lightning McQueen clip where it's like Lightning McQueen's #1 fan, and that's kind of just what my dad reminded me of in the moment, because he was very hyped up and he lost me for a minute there when we were all moving forward, and he looked so worried, and that just made me very happy and emotional and elicited some tears. Anyway, when we got to the front, that's when it was like, oh my goodness, this is real. And the thing went off, beep, 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 and then I was in the water. And the first 100 meters went fast because the first 30, 40 meters is just, you can kind of run into it. And then after that, the first half of the race kind of seemed semi-fast, or the first half of the swim seemed semi-fast, but the last 900 meters just seemed so slow, and there was also a little bit of wind going against me at that point. And I was keeping my form and everything good and everything, but it just felt like it was never going to end. And I was worried that I was running out of time because so a lot of people were passing me and I was already towards the end. And when you're in the water, it's really hard to like notice where everybody is and everything. You just see that people keep passing you. So regardless of that, once I got out of the water, I still didn't really know what time or anything it was, but I got out of the water. I was getting out of my swimsuit. I saw my brother and my mom and my dad again, and then I made my way into the transition area, and that's when my first like confidence boost was, because the transition area, you can see how many people are ahead or behind of you, because there's 1,600 bikes there. So if it looks filled up, that means that you're towards the front. And when I got there, it looked like most people's bikes were still there. And that made me just very happy, to say the least, because I felt that uh, I was kind of in the lead, or like not in the end at least. So then I took out my swimming stuff, wore my biking stuff, biking shoes, biking shorts, biking top, sunglasses, helmet, all that stuff. And when I was putting on my top, the zipper broke, because there's a zipper, but I kind of forgot there was a zipper, so I tried to put it on from like above, and in doing that, my zipper broke, and in that moment I really couldn't fix it, and I didn't fix it. So I like zipped it, and kind of like it was like closed, but it wasn't fixed. And then we started biking, and the biking, the first 2 hours of the biking felt wonderful. Like I was on pace, doing great. And the bike course goes all the way from like almost like basically all the way north of Vancouver Island, and then it goes to like about 3/4 of the way down. So like you start in kind of the middle part of Vancouver, then you go down about to the bottom fourth of the island, or like to where like the boundary of the bottom fourth is, I guess, and then you go to the top, and you go back to Beaver Lake. And first of all, it was such a scenic ride. It was really, really beautiful, and I didn't bring my phone so I can record most of it, but that was pretty cool, that it was a very beautiful ride. Now the second thing, which I thought was really cool, was the fact that we had the priority on all 56 miles. Like at every intersection, or basically every intersection, they had contractors, they had employees there who, like construction workers, and they just had the slow and stop signs, like at construction sites. And whenever they would see a biker, they would just tell all the cars to stop, and the bikers would go, and then they would let the cars go. So there were lines, at some points there were lines of like 15, 20 cars, and there were just bikers coming, so the cars couldn't go. And that just felt like, wow, that's crazy that we're the priority on this whole island right now. We are the priority. But at the same time, there were a lot of people who were just coming outside their houses with signs, with bells, with a bunch of random things like that, and that was such a motivation booster, because they're like these little kids, and they would just come out and cheer with bells and say yeah, and that was just very cool. But the first 2 hours of the bike were actually going pretty well. I was on pace for about 4 hours, 10 minutes. But the last 2 hours were horrid. First of all, obviously I'd been biking for a while, so that was that. But on top of that, the hills got bigger, and I think at about 2.5 hours, there was a giant hill, and everybody was on like the biggest gear combo, where it was like I was looking at my speed, and it was like 4.7 miles per hour through a whole like kilometer stretch. Probably it was like an insane distance to just be going that slow, and that took so long, and everybody was just, you were grinding up the hill, and everybody was going that slow, and there was nothing, you couldn't go fast. There was just no energy. There was nothing. It was just a steep hill. It was 9% grade. But luckily there was a turnaround at the top, and then that hill, so you went down that too. Pause right here. We're gonna go back to the first hour. I think about 20 minutes into the ride, there was a downhill, and that was like a steep downhill, and I, kicked it into high gear, and then was pedaling, and I went in like the aero position and everything, and I hit 36 miles per hour on the bike, which is crazy. Like I'd hit like my previous max like 24, 25 miles per hour on a downhill, and 36, like I was just looking at the speed, and it was going up, and I was going faster and faster, and 36 is just crazy. But then a little bit after that, I saw that somebody like at the bottom of a hill had fell, and then the side of their clothes was just ripped, and they were like had a like wound there. And then after that, I resisted on going very fast. But regardless, after that one big giant hill, there were a few more hills, and every hill was such a struggle to climb, because it was just so hard, Now, the bike cutoff, how Ironman works is that you have an hour, 10-minute cutoff for the swim. So after the last swim enters, an hour 10 minutes everybody has to be out, and you also have to finish like an hour 10 minutes after you start. And then the bike cutoff is 5.5 hours after the last swimmer enters. So the bike cutoff is 12:30, and then the final race cutoff is 3:30. Now, I I was like 30 minutes ahead of the bike cutoff, which I was feeling good about. And overall, I think the bike was just, it, it, it was really hard because it was a lot more hilly than I was used to. I practiced a lot in Banks Veronia, and that's like a lot of uphill and downhill. But this one, like, this literally had like giant hills that we were climbing. But I mean, I loved it. It was very scenic and beautiful. Now, after that, um, we get into the transition area, and I switch my clothes and everything, and then I also have I had KT tape on my leg for my shin splints, which are pretty much healed by now, which is good. I think they're healed at least, um, but I just had it there just because I didn't know it was fully healed yet. So I replaced the KT tape because running is where I wanted new fresh KT tape, and then I put on the shoes and changed all the stuff, and then I after doing that, I made my way to the start of the running course, and they had sunscreen there. Oh yeah, and also during the biking course, they had 3 stations along the way, and each station had bottles of like Gatorade that you could put on your bike, a bottle of water, um, and a bunch of snacks like energy gels. Actually, I took 2 energy gels during that whole thing, and I don't know how much it helped, but I think it helped. And also after the first stop, after I was trying to shove the energy gels in my back pocket and the pocket of my um, bike top, and when I was doing that, because the zipper wasn't fully fixed, it came apart. But then when it came apart, I was able to I stopped there, and then I was able to fix it at that moment because um, I just I decided to go for it, and I somehow managed to fix it. So then that was fine. Anyway, now we're back to the running. They had sunscreen at that table, and they had they had sunscreen. So I put on some sunscreen, and then I went and used the bathroom. And that T2 transition between biking and running was 13 minutes, which is pretty slow for that transition. Now, the run was the swim. Okay, so the swim was in a lake, and it was kind of, you go down a little bit, turn, and then come back. And then the run was around the same lake, and there were 2 laps that you had to do. So first of all, everything was in kilometers. The biking mileage and the running mileage, which for me isn't that bad because I'm really good at flipping between those in my mind and calculating it really fast. But I guess it just made it harder for me to push myself in a way. Not really, but I was going 8 minutes. My pace at that point was 8 minutes a kilometer, when normally my goal pace at training was 6 minutes a kilometer. But that was also because the bike ride was more strenuous and I was just more tired. Now, after the first lap, I think the first lap I did in semi-okay pace, but I didn't realize how many people were finishing. But regardless of that, the second lap is where it started to get hard, because the first lap when you're going, there's a bunch of people who are finishing their second lap and a bunch of people who are doing their first lap. So there's a ton of people, and you're passing people, you're just all around a lot of people. The second lap, especially because I was towards the rear of the race, really, I was one of the last people, it was really, really hard. I mean, it was there was nobody there, and it was you didn't know if it was just very demoralizing in a way, because you're oh, I'm one of the last guys. And the racing had, it was a 10-kilometer loop basically, but then in some areas they took you out a little more and took you back. So then eventually they made it to about 10.5. So that way the whole total distance was 13.1 miles, like it's supposed to be. And this loop was, they had 5 aid stations, they had Gatorade, water, Red Bull, Cola, Coca-Cola for some reason, which I thought was weird. And they had bananas, fig bars, energy gels, oranges, and maybe a few. Oh yeah, and they had some salt stuff. So they had chips and pretzels. And at each of these 5 aid stations, they had a truck, just like a normal cargo truck basically, and they just had that was filled with just all boxes and cases of each of these things, and they had tons of ice. And I was dang, the resources that they put into this that was pretty cool. You know, that you're going and you're like, wow, there's so much resources and stuff put into this. But regardless, my dad was like at some point towards the end of the lap, and the first time I was going around, he was like, "You're running low on time. You gotta pick it up." And so the second lap, I was like trying to push myself, but I was just so tired at that point. I was trying to do like in my mind, I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna go 20, um, 100 steps and then 40 steps rest. Run 100 steps, 40 steps rest." And my watch doesn't do distance, and normally when I go on runs, I use my phone for distance, but I don't bring my phone with me either. So like I didn't really know like they had kilometer markers at each kilometer, but then it was just so hard for me to like just be like, oh my goodness, there's still like I'm still not there yet, and then like still like there's the kilometers are slowly going up. They're just not going up fast enough, and it was very like mental and like I don't know. I was talking to Maher about this, but I thought about David Goggins so much during that time because I was like, man, he would be disappointed right now. Like, I gotta pick it up, man. It's like, I gotta finish it. So, eventually I got to the finish line, and it was really, really hard. That last lap was by far one of the hardest things I've ever done. It was just like, and also like my dad was saying, you're running low on time, but I didn't really know how much time I had left because I knew that the final cutoff was 8.5 hours after the last swimmer started, which is 3:30, and I was like at 2 hours or so, at 2 o'clock or something. That was like around the time when this whole discussion started to happen. But then I was like, wait a minute, is the cutoff 8:30 for everyone, or 3:30 for everyone, or is it 8.5 hours after you start? And I didn't know the answer to this, and I didn't even know exactly what time I started because I didn't have my watch when I started because I didn't know my watch was waterproof, which is another story. But then I didn't even know when I started, so then I was just like pushing myself, try to get this done by 3 o'clock, try to get this done by 3 o'clock, and eventually I made it to the finish line. Now, the swim I got done in 47 minutes. Now, 47 minutes isn't my original 3 month ago goal pace was 40 minutes. 47 isn't bad. Now the bike I got done in 4 hours, or I don't even remember how much it was, but the swim plus T1 transition plus bike, I finished in 5 hours 22 minutes, which is 8 minutes before the cutoff. So or like 8 minutes before my cutoff, like not the, so like if I finished 8 minutes later or 9 minutes later, or like a little more than 8 minutes later, then I would have been able to finish the race, but I would have received a did not finish or on my official time table. So I was 8 minutes. Now that is pushing it close, pulling it close. 8 minutes. And also, like I said, when I came out of the swim, most of the bikes were there, so I was ahead of most people. When I came back from the bike, most of the bikes were there. So that just meant like I was behind most people because like most everybody had already kind of came and transitioned to running. And then the run, I finished in like 8 hours 26 minutes, which was 4 minutes before my cutoff. Now, if I finished 4 minutes later, I would have received a do not finish, which that would have been awful. But after that, I crossed the finish line after the whole deal, and I got myself a medal. It says finisher, Ironman Victoria 2023, it says May 28, 2023. This is the front, and then we got my time and name engraved on the back. It's hard to see kind of, but there we go. And then got myself a little hat. It says Ironman Victoria finisher. And then this is a shirt that they gave yesterday, which just says Ironman Victoria. Yeah, so that's about all. That's my post-race reflection. Ideally, we're going to try to make a video of the whole race experience and everything leading up to the race. But yeah, this is just my raw reflection after the race. Overall, it was a great experience. I'm so happy that I did it, and I think that I learned a lot. It was just a really cool experience. Just every part of the experience. Like also, Ironman is one of the things where it costs like $400 to $600 to register for an event, and that's like an insane amount of money for a racing event. Like you're paying to put yourself through torture. But when you go there and you see all the stuff that they've done for the event, you're like, yeah, 400 is actually pretty cheap. They marked the whole 56-mile bike ride was very well marked. Every turn there were arrows leading up to it on the ground with the orange tape. They had signs posted. They had a person at each turn telling people where to go. They had people stopping all the cars. They had bike decks going around in motorcycles and cars and motorcycles and trucks to help people who like messed up their bike in whatever way. They had ambulances every little bit. They had, like I said, they had like 5 trucks of just an insane amount of food. And obviously, a lot of the stuff is sponsored, but on top of that, the organization Ironman Victoria donated $15,000 to the Ironman to the Victoria community, which I'm just like Ironman. Yeah, they make money off the event, but I think it's like a very good organization, and I mean, after I'm just very happy. This was a crazy experience, and I am happy that I finished it with 4 minutes left. I got this with 4 minutes left. Yeah, so that's all. And one last thing, this is a second video because I forgot to talk about this, but how am I feeling in terms of physical fitness after the race? Well, definitely could have trained more. I mean, okay, so I've been training for 3 months, and the last month has been iffy on training, but the first 2 months of my training were very regular. I was going to the gym every morning at 5 a.m. and doing a 2 to 3 hour workout. And I think this last month could have been a lot better in training. There was a lot of stuff from school that happened where I had to focus on that for a little bit, so it just didn't work out the best. And then I hurt my shin. I got shin splints, so that just wasn't ideal this close to the race, especially with the lack of training these last month. But all things considered, after the race, I was feeling pretty good. Like, my upper legs were hurting a little bit, and my lower back was hurting a lot, especially from the bike and the posture and stuff. But overall, I actually did not feel too bad and too tired. The biggest thing was I was craving good food so bad because these last 2 days I've been carb loading and I haven't had any fruits and veggies because you don't want to accidentally have to go poop while you're racing. So it's just been foods with carbs, and we're in Victoria on vacation and everybody else is having this great food, and I'm just here with my Instapot pasta while we're at a restaurant, or with like this bland tofu rice cauliflower mix that we got instead of like actual colorful food. And normally I don't care that much about food, but just being in a city with such good food and then instead eating all like random like just really plain and bland food, and it was like interesting experience. And after the race I was very happy to eat some more colorful food. And speaking of after the race, after we finished, they had an athlete area where they had like 3 different types of pasta, and they had bananas and a lot of food just for the athletes, which I thought was pretty cool, and I ate a lot of pasta, and that made me very happy. I'm very happy with the whole event, like I said before. And this is actually the conclusion of the video.